Look, have you ever noticed how the moment someone goes completely silent on you, no texts, no calls, no explanation, something strange happens inside you, you start replaying every conversation, every word you said, every moment you might have crossed a line. You check your phone every 5 minutes. You draft messages and delete them. You lose sleep over someone who isn't even speaking to you. But here's what nobody tells you: that silence isn't empty, it is full. It is packed with meaning. It is one of the most powerful psychological signals a human being can send. And once you understand what it really means, once you decode the message behind it, you will never be controlled by someone's silence again. Because the person who goes silent is always sending you a message. You just haven't learned how to read it yet. It feels strange. But it's not magic. It's psychology. Let me understand something first. We live in a world where we think communication only happens through words. Texts, conversations, arguments, apologies. We think that if someone isn't speaking, they aren't communicating. That is one of the biggest psychological mistakes you can make. Research in human behavior consistently shows that absence, deliberate, calculated absence, is one of the most powerful forms of communication. In fact, in many cases, what someone does not say tells you far more about them than anything they could actually put into words. And silence. Silence is not the absence of a message. Silence is the message. But here's where it gets complicated. Because not all silence is the same. Some silence is healthy. Some silence is a weapon. Some silence is a cry for help. And some silence is the coldest, most calculated form of dark psychology manipulation known to human relationships. Today, we're going to break down all of it. We're going to go deep into the dark psychology of silence. We're going to look at exactly what kind of message someone is sending when they go silent. We're going to understand the different types of silence, the psychology behind each one, who uses silence as a weapon and why, how it affects you, and most importantly, exactly what you should do when someone goes silent on you. Because once you understand this, you hold the power. Think about it. The first thing you need to understand is this: why do humans go silent in the first place? To answer this, we have to go back to something fundamental about human psychology. Every human being has a core set of needs. Safety, connection, significance, control. These are not optional desires. These are deep psychological requirements. And when one of these needs is threatened, the human mind goes into a kind of protective mode. Now, here is where silence enters the picture. When someone feels that they cannot safely express their emotions through words, because they fear rejection, conflict, judgment, or because they want to gain the upper hand, they will often retreat into silence instead. Not because they have nothing to say, but because silence to them feels safer or more powerful than speaking. I used to know someone who would go completely quiet the moment an argument started. For years, I thought they were just calm, composed, that they needed time to process. I respected that. But then I started noticing something. The silence was never random. It always happened at a very specific moment. The moment when they were about to lose the argument. The moment when they had done something wrong and didn't want to face it. The moment when they wanted to see how much I would chase them. It wasn't calm. It was calculated. And that's the first dark truth about silence. It is almost never what it appears to be on the surface. The second truth: silence has a direction. Here's something most people miss. When someone goes silent, your brain immediately turns inward. You start asking, what did I do wrong? You start questioning yourself. You start carrying the emotional weight of a problem that may not even be yours. This is called self-referential thinking. And it is completely automatic. When social information stops coming in, when someone suddenly goes quiet, your brain fills in the gap by generating its own narrative. And that narrative almost always points at you. Think about it. If someone stops texting you, you don't think maybe they're busy. You think maybe I said something wrong. If a friend suddenly becomes distant, you don't think they might be going through something. You think, did I hurt them somehow? This is why silence is such a powerful psychological tool. It doesn't need to say anything. It lets your own mind do the work. The person who goes silent doesn't have to accuse you of anything. Doesn't have to confront you. Doesn't have to explain themselves. They simply remove their presence and your brain does the rest. You become your own prosecutor. You put yourself on trial. And you do it completely alone. This is not an accident. In dark psychology, this is called leveraging cognitive dissonance through absence. You create a discomfort, an unresolved tension, and you leave the other person to sit inside that discomfort until they reach out, apologize, or give you what you want. It's sophisticated. And if you don't understand what's happening, it works almost every single time. Now let's look at the different types of silence, because this is where it gets really important. Not every silence is manipulation. I want to be clear about that. Some silence comes from genuine pain, some from self-protection, some from emotional exhaustion. The dark psychology only applies to silence that is intentional, strategic, and designed to produce a specific result in the other person. So let me break down the 5 main types of silence you will encounter in relationships. The first type, protective silence. This is the silence of someone who genuinely does not feel safe speaking right now. They have been hurt before, perhaps in this relationship, perhaps in a previous one, and words have become dangerous to them. So they withdraw, not to control you, but to protect themselves. How do you recognize protective silence? The person usually comes back, not in days. Not after you've chased them for a week. But when they feel safe again, they re-engage. They are willing to talk about why they went quiet. They are not using their silence to extract anything from you. They simply needed a moment to feel safe. This is the silence of someone who is wounded, not weaponized. The second type, exhausted silence. This is the silence of someone who has simply run out of emotional capacity. They have been communicating, maybe for months or years, and they have reached a point where they have nothing left to give to the conversation. This is actually one of the most heartbreaking forms of silence in relationships. Because by the time someone reaches this point, the silence often signals that they have already made a decision. They are not withdrawing to test you. They are withdrawing because they are done. Think about it. Have you ever noticed how sometimes, after years of arguments and attempts and conversations going nowhere, someone just stops? No more anger. No more tears, no more trying, just quiet. That quiet is not peace. That quiet is the sound of someone who has accepted something you haven't yet. The third type, punishing silence. Now we move into darker territory. Punishing silence is deliberate. It is used when someone wants you to feel the consequences of your actions or what they perceive as your actions. They believe you have wronged them, and instead of addressing it directly, they withdraw their presence as a form of punishment. This silence communicates, "You hurt me, and now you will feel what it is like to be without me." It is essentially an emotional penalty, and it often works. Because the person on the receiving end, especially if they care deeply, will immediately begin to try and fix things, even if they don't fully understand what they did wrong. Here is the problem with punishing silence. It never actually resolves anything. The underlying issue doesn't get addressed. Both people just cycle through a pattern. Withdrawal, chasing, temporary reconnection, another trigger, another withdrawal, over and over. The relationship becomes a series of emotional hostage situations. No. That is not connection. That is conditioning. The fourth type, strategic withdrawal, what dark psychology considers the most dangerous form of silence. This is the most calculated form of silence. And the most dangerous. Strategic withdrawal is not about hurt feelings or emotional exhaustion. It is about power. The person who uses this type of silence understands, consciously or unconsciously, that their absence is more valuable than their presence. That withholding communication creates anxiety, longing, and compliance in the other person. They have studied you. They know how much you value connection with them. And they have learned that by removing that connection suddenly and without explanation, they can reset the power dynamic in the relationship in their favor. The pattern usually looks like this. Things are going well. You feel close to them. Then, without warning, they go completely silent. No reason, no explanation. And you, because you care, immediately begin to question yourself, reach out and work to restore the connection. And the moment you do, they return, warm, present, as if nothing happened, and this is the trap, because what just happened, without either of you necessarily nomming it, is a transaction. You demonstrated your attachment, they demonstrated their control, and you both learned something. You learned that their silence works on you, and they learned that they can use it again. This is not love. This is conditioning. And here's the dark truth. Most people who use this type of silence are not fully aware they're doing it. It has been a survival mechanism since childhood. They learned early that withdrawing attention controlled people around them, and so it became their default tool for managing relationships. But understanding the origin doesn't make it less harmful. Compassion for someone's history does not require you to become their subject. The fifth type, dignified silence. This is the silence that most people don't talk about, because it doesn't fit the narrative of emotional drama. Dignified silence is when someone goes quiet not out of hurt, not out of strategy, not out of exhaustion, but out of genuine wisdom and self-respect. This is the silence of someone who has decided that a conversation is not worth having, that a relationship is not worth fighting for, that they would rather preserve their peace than continue a cycle that serves neither person. And here is what makes dignified silence so powerful. It doesn't need you to notice it. It doesn't need you to chase. It doesn't require a reaction. The person who practices dignified silence has already made peace with the outcome. They have stepped away cleanly, without anger and without apology. Think about it. Have you ever had someone quietly exit your life? No drama, no last message, no grand gesture, and found yourself thinking about them for months, wondering what they were thinking, feeling a strange respect for them even though they left. That was dignified silence. Your absence isn't weakness. It's your secret superpower. Now let's talk about the dark psychology of who uses silence as a weapon. And why? Because this is the part that most relationship advice completely ignores. Silence as a weapon is not exclusive to any one personality type, but there are certain psychological profiles where it shows up most consistently and most dangerously. And understanding these profiles will help you recognize what you're dealing with before it causes serious damage. The first profile, the narcissist. Narcissists have a complex relationship with silence. On one hand, they crave attention and validation above almost everything else. On the other hand, they have learned that withdrawing attention is one of the most effective ways to control others. The narcissist's use of silence is almost always reactive. Something has triggered their ego, a perceived slight, a challenge to their authority, a moment where they did not get the admiration they expected. And their response is to go cold, silent, distant. And they will stay silent for exactly as long as it takes for you to come back to them with enough reassurance, apology, or emotional energy to restore their sense of superiority. Here is the important thing to understand about narcissistic silence. It is not about the relationship. It is not about you. It is entirely about them restoring their internal sense of control. You are simply the mechanism through which that control is exercised. Another truth, narcissists will often escalate the silence if you don't respond quickly enough. They will move from silence to mild provocations, posting on social media, making you aware through third parties that they're perfectly fine and moving on to see if that produces the reaction the silence didn't. Watch for this pattern. It tells you everything. The second profile, the avoidant attachment. This one is more sympathetic in its origins, but no less impactful in its effects. Someone with an avoidant attachment style has learned, usually in early childhood, that emotional closeness is dangerous. That needing people leads to disappointment. That vulnerability gets punished. So their nervous system has developed a reflex. When intimacy increases beyond a certain threshold, they pull back. This is not calculated manipulation. It is fear masquerading as independence. The pattern with avoidant attachment looks like this. As the relationship deepens and you begin to rely on them more, they begin to feel a kind of internal claustrophobia, a sense of being trapped, and their instinct is to create distance through silence, through physical absence, through burying themselves in work or distractions. The cruel irony of this pattern is that the more you chase them when they withdraw, the more they retreat. Your pursuit triggers their avoidance reflex further. The only thing that ever actually draws them back is you creating genuine distance yourself, not as a tactic, as a boundary. I used to chase someone with exactly this pattern. The more I reached out when they went quiet, the colder they became. The moment I genuinely stepped back and focused on my own life, not as a strategy, not to make them miss me, but because I had decided my peace was more important, they came back. Real absence only works when you're actually building your life. The third profile, the passive-aggressive. The passive-aggressive personality uses silence differently from the narcissist or the avoidant. Their silence is a communication style, just an indirect, dishonest one. When a passive-aggressive person goes silent, they are almost always angry. But they have never learned, or never chosen, to express anger directly. So instead of saying, "I'm upset with you and here is why," they say nothing. They perform coldness. They answer questions in monosyllables. They agree to things they have no intention of doing. They smile when asked if everything is okay and then continue to make sure everything is not okay. Their silence is designed to communicate displeasure without creating the accountability that comes with a direct conversation. Why? Because a direct conversation creates an opportunity for resolution. And a passive-aggressive person, often unconsciously, does not actually want resolution. They want to be understood without having to be vulnerable. They want you to sense their pain without them having to name it. This keeps them in a perpetually victimized position, which has its own kind of power. The fourth profile, the emotionally exhausted, this is different from the others. And I include it here not because it is a dark psychology pattern, but because it is often misread as one. An emotionally exhausted person goes silent because they are genuinely depleted. They have been carrying too much for too long in the relationship, in their personal life, in their internal world. They have nothing left to offer the conversation, and so they go quiet. The danger of misreading this as manipulation is that you may respond with pressure, with demands for communication, with accusations, and make the situation significantly worse. Someone who is genuinely depleted needs space, not pursuit. They need to feel that they can rest without losing the relationship. The distinguishing feature of emotionally exhausted silence is that it is consistent. It isn't selective. It isn't happening after specific triggers related to you. And the person usually shows clear behavioral signs of depletion in other areas of their life as well, at work, with friends, in their habits. Respect this silence. It is asking for something real. Now the most important part. What should you actually do when someone goes silent on you? Because understanding the psychology is only useful if you know how to respond in a way that protects you. Let me be direct with you. Most people's instinct when someone goes silent is to close the gap as quickly as possible, to reach out, to apologize, to do whatever is necessary to restore the connection. And I understand why. Silence creates anxiety. Anxiety demands resolution. And the fastest path to resolution appears to be making the silence stop. No, that is the instinct. But that is not the right response. And here is why. When you immediately close the gap that someone else has created, you're telling them with your behavior, not your words, that their silence is more powerful than your self-respect. You are training them in that moment that going silent is an effective way to move you. And they will remember that lesson. So what is the right response? Step 1. Pause before you react. When someone goes silent, your nervous system will immediately begin producing anxiety. This is biological. Your brain reads social disconnection as a threat, and it is designed to motivate you to resolve that threat as quickly as possible. But you are not your nervous system. You have the capacity to observe that anxiety without acting on it. Give yourself at least 24 hours before you respond to someone's silence. Not out of spite, not as a power game, but because the anxiety you feel in the first 24 hours is not your clearest thinking. It is your fear talking. And decisions made from fear rarely serve you. Step 2. Ask yourself what kind of silence this is. Use the framework we just went through. Based on what you know about this person, their history, their patterns, the context of what happened before the silence, which type of silence does this appear to be? Is this protective silence? Are they afraid right now and need to feel safe? Is this exhausted silence? Are they carrying too much and need rest? Is this punishing silence? Are they withdrawing as a response to something they feel you did? Is this strategic withdrawal? Does this feel calculated, a pattern that repeats itself at convenient moments? Or is this dignified silence? Are they simply done? Each of these requires a different response. Reacting the same way to all 5 types of silence is like giving the same medicine to 5 different illnesses. It doesn't work. Step 3. Send one clear, non-desperate message. Then stop. If you feel that reaching out is appropriate, not because of your anxiety, but because the situation genuinely warrants it, do it once. Clearly. With no desperation and no pressure. Something simple. Something that opens a door without demanding they walk through it. I've noticed you've been quiet. I'm here when you're ready to talk. That's it. No follow-up texts. No, why aren't you responding? No tracking their social media for evidence of life. One message. Clear, dignified. Then you step back. Step 4. Let the silence reveal something. Here is the most important psychological shift you can make. Stop treating the silence as a problem to be solved, and start treating it as information to be received. Because the way someone handles silence, their own and yours, tells you more about them than almost any conversation could. It shows you their emotional maturity. their respect for you as a person, their capacity for communication when things are difficult. A person who routinely uses silence to punish, to control, to avoid accountability, that pattern does not disappear with enough love or enough patience. It is part of how they operate. And you need to decide with clear eyes whether that is something you want to build a relationship around. Think about it. Step 5. Fill your own silence wisely. This is perhaps the least discussed aspect of this entire subject. What do you do in the silence that someone else creates? Because here is the truth most people avoid. The silence that someone imposes on you is not just a test of whether you will chase them. It is also an invitation, whether they intend it or not, for you to encounter yourself, to sit with your own thoughts, to ask yourself questions about this relationship that the noise of constant communication usually prevents you from asking. Do I actually want this relationship to continue? Not do I miss them, because missing someone is just a neurological response to absence. But do I genuinely want what this relationship is, in its clearest and most honest form? Am I pursuing connection here, or am I pursuing resolution to my own anxiety? What am I actually afraid would happen if I didn't reach out? These are uncomfortable questions. Most people prefer to send the text rather than sit with them. But the answers, if you are willing to find them, will tell you more about yourself and this relationship than any conversation with the other person ever could. Respect grows where access is limited. Another thing most people ignore: the silence you send. We have been talking about receiving silence, about being on the end of someone's withdrawal. But I want to spend a moment on the other side of this, because the truth is, most of us have used silence as a tool at some point, consciously or not. We have gone quiet when we were hurt. We have withdrawn when we wanted someone to notice. We have let our absence speak when our words felt too vulnerable, and I'm not here to judge that. Silence has been a survival mechanism for most of us at some point. When speaking felt dangerous, going quiet kept us safe. But here is what I want you to consider. If you are routinely using silence as your primary response to conflict or disconnection, if silence is your default language when things get hard, ask yourself honestly what that silence is actually doing. Is it protecting you? Or is it preventing you from building the kind of connection that actually requires you to be present? Because authentic connection, real, deep, lasting connection, cannot be built in silence. It requires the courage to speak even when speaking is difficult. To say, I am hurt, even when you'd rather go cold. To stay in the conversation even when withdrawal feels safer. And yes, this is difficult. It takes a different kind of strength than most people recognize. But the alternative, a life spent managing people through strategic absence, maintaining relationships through withdrawal rather than through words, is ultimately a very lonely kind of power. Think about it. Let me give you a real example. A few years ago, I was watching two people in a relationship, both of whom used silence differently. One of them would go quiet whenever they felt overwhelmed. Not to punish, not to manipulate, but because they genuinely did not know how to process emotion and speak at the same time. Their silence was protective. And when the other person gave them space, real space, not anxious hovering, they would return within a day, calmer, more present, and willing to talk. The other person's silence was different. It was precise. It happened at very specific moments, always after they had done something that could have been challenged, always just long enough to make the other person anxious enough to apologize, always ending the moment they got the reassurance they wanted. Both were going silent, but one was protecting themselves. The other was running a pattern. And learning to tell the difference, based on timing, context, repetition, and what the silence consistently produces, is one of the most important relationship skills you will ever develop, because the psychology of silence is not about one behavior. It is about a pattern of behavior. And patterns, once you learn to read them, never lie. Another truth. Silence changes you. I want to talk about something that most people don't consider when they're in the middle of experiencing someone's silence. Extended exposure to someone else's withdrawal, especially when it is repeated, unpredictable, and unexplained, changes how your nervous system operates. Psychologists call this a state of hypervigilance. Your body begins to exist in a constant state of low-grade alertness. You become sensitized to the other person's emotional state. You learn to read every small shift, a shorter text, a longer gap in replies, a slightly cooler tone, as a potential sign of incoming silence. And this hypervigilance does not stay inside the relationship. It spreads. You begin to carry it into other relationships, into your work, into your sense of safety in the world. You become the person who overexplains, who apologizes preemptively, who reads too much into pauses in conversation because your nervous system has been trained to treat silence as a threat. This is not weakness. This is adaptation. Your brain did what it was designed to do. It protected you from pain by becoming incredibly sensitive to its early warning signs. But the adaptation that once protected you becomes a prison. And the only way out is to begin recognizing what is happening. To understand that your nervous system is responding to a ghost, that the hypervigilance was learned. And that what was learned can, with time and awareness, be unlearned. You are not broken. You are adapted. And adaptation can be redirected. The deepest dark psychology of silence, scarcity, and value. Let me close with something that cuts to the very heart of why silence, particularly strategic silence, is so effective. It comes down to one of the most fundamental laws of human psychology. We value what is scarce. This is not a flaw in human nature. It is a feature. Our brains are wired to assign value based on availability. What is abundant is treated as common. What is rare is treated as precious. And this is exactly what strategic silence exploits. When someone is consistently available to you, always there, always responding, always present, your brain begins to take that presence for granted. Not because you are selfish or ungrateful, simply because your brain is doing its job. Abundant resources do not need to be prioritized. But the moment that presence is withdrawn, suddenly and without explanation, something in your brain recalibrates. The value of that person's attention immediately rises. You begin to want what you can no longer access. It feels strange. But it's not magic. It's psychology. And here is the double-edged reality of this principle. If you are someone who is constantly available, who replies immediately, who never creates space, who makes yourself completely accessible at all times, you are, unintentionally, undermining your own perceived value in the other person's eyes. This is not about playing games. This is not about manufactured mystery. This is about understanding that genuine presence requires genuine substance. That the version of you that shows up in your own full life, pursuing your goals, maintaining your boundaries, not centering your existence around any single relationship, is inherently more interesting and more valuable than the version of you that is perpetually waiting. Your absence only means something when your presence has weight. And your presence has weight when you are someone, not just someone who is available. Diamonds are valuable because they are rare. Rocks are everywhere. No one treasures rocks. Be the diamond, not through coldness, not through strategy, but through genuine investment in who you are and what you are building. Because the strongest position in life is not needing someone, but choosing them.